Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend, the member for Sutton Coldfield, for raising this urgent question. The situation in Yemen remains amongst the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. Two-thirds of the entire population, more than 20 million people, requiring some form of humanitarian assistance. The UN estimates that in the first half of this year, 47,000 people will be in famine conditions and 16.2 million at risk of starvation. Improving the dire circumstances faced by so many Yemenis continues to be a priority for this government. Yesterday, I attended the high-level pledging conference for the United Nations Humanitarian Appeal for Yemen. I announced that the UK will provide at least £87 million in aid to Yemen over the course of the financial year 21-22. Our total aid contribution since the conflict began was already over £1 billion. This new pledge will feed an additional 240,000 of the most vulnerable Yemenis every month, support 400 health clinics, and provide clean water for 1.6 million people. We will also provide one-off cash support to 1.5 million of Yemeni's poorest households to help them buy food and basic supplies. Alongside the money that we are spending to reduce humanitarian suffering in Yemen, the UK continues to play a leading diplomatic role in support of the UN's efforts to end the conflict. Yesterday, I spoke to the United Nations Special Envoy, Martin Griffiths, and we discussed how the UK could assist him in ending this devastating war. Last week, the United Nations Security Council adopted a UK-drafted resolution which reiterated the Council's support for United Nations peace process, condemned the Houthi offensive in Marib and attacks on Saudi Arabia, and sanctioned Houthi official Sultan Zabin for the use of sexual violence as a tool of war. Just last night, a Houthi missile hit and injured 5 civilians in southern Saudi Arabia. I condemn this further attack by the Houthis on civilian targets in Saudi Arabia and reiterate our commitment to help Saudi Arabia defend itself. We're also working closely with our regional and international partners for peace. On the 25th of February, the Foreign Secretary spoke to the Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan about the Yemen peace process, and he also recently discussed this with the UN Secretary of State. I discussed Yemen with the Omani ambassador to the UK on the 4th of February and spoke to the Yemeni Foreign Minister on the 20th of January regarding the attack on Aden and the formation of a new Yemeni cabinet. The UK is also leading efforts to tackle COVID-19 in Yemen and around the world. This month, as part of the UN Security Council presidency, my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, called for a ceasefire across the globe to allow vulnerable people living in conflict zones to be vaccinated against COVID-19. As one of the biggest donors to the World Health Organization and Gavi's COVAX initiative, the UK is helping ensure millions of vaccine doses get through to people living in crises like Yemen. I thank my right honourable friend for raising this question and thank honourable members for their continued interest in Yemen. The conflict and humanitarian crisis deserves our attention, and the UK government remains fully committed to doing what we can to help secure a better future for Yemenis.
I now call on Andrew Mitchell, who has 2 minutes. Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is a decent fellow and will not have enjoyed what he announced yesterday. Last night he will have heard the United Nations General Secretary tell him that for Yemen, and I quote, "cutting aid is a death sentence. Cutting it by 50% is unconscionable." As the senior and respected British official at the UN, Sir Mark Lowcock, said, millions of Yemeni children will now continue the slow, agonising and obscene process of starving to death. Mr. Speaker, I remain, I understand, the only European politician who has been recently into Sadr in North Yemen to see an acute malnutrition ward in the hospital there, part funded by the British taxpayer. Life-saving work which will now be halved. My right honourable friend told this House just last month that, and I quote, "Yemen will remain a UK priority." And yet the 5th richest country in the world is cutting support by more than half to one of the poorest countries in the world, and during a global pandemic. Every single member of this House, Mr. Speaker, was elected just over a year ago on a promise to maintain the 0.7. Aid has been cut already under that formula because our economy has contracted. But the government told this House that they would protect 7 strategic priorities, including, and I quote, human preparedness and response. No one in this House, Mr. Speaker, believes that the Foreign Secretary wants to do this. It is a harbinger of terrible cuts to come. Everyone in this House knows that the cut to the Point 7 is not a result of tough choices. It is a strategic mistake with deadly consequences. Mr. Speaker, this is not who we are. This is not how global Britain acts. We are a generous, decent country. The Point 7 is enshrined in law, Mr. Speaker. This House must surely have a vote. We must all search our consciences.
Minister?
I genuinely thank my right honourable friend. He speaks with authority and passion as an experienced member of this House and as a former Secretary of State for International Development. I would remind the House that the commitment we made at the pledging conference represents a floor, not a ceiling, and the figures that we have ultimately distributed in previous years have in every one of those years exceeded the figure pledged. We are going through a process at the moment where we work out how we distribute our ODA. In whatever way that process concludes, we will remain, in both absolute terms and percentage terms, one of the most generous ODA donating countries in the world, and to Yemen itself, we still remain one of the largest donors to that humanitarian crisis.
I now go to Shadow Minister Preet Kaur Gill, who is participating virtually, who's also got 2 minutes.